perfect setup. I think that's a bit of a unicorn thing, to be honest. I don't think it's out there because there'll always be something that we could improve.
There are many different circuits on the Formula One calendar, and the reality is that if you design the perfect car for one, it won't be perfect at another track. When Formula One teams talk about setup, they're talking about the ability to fine-tune that car, to make adjustments to it so that it works well at all those different circuits, and ultimately you're trying to extract the maximum performance.
The pre-event stuff all tends to be done in the virtual world, so that's all the simulations that are either done by computer or in the driver-in-loop simulator. So that's really the first building block of the weekend. They tend to give us the first look of the rough areas where we should be focusing our attention in terms of putting the car in its particular window, be it ride heights, be it aero package, any of the ride elements that are on the car, and really that's the first part of the puzzle. Now, before the race, the driver feedback, we tend to have just a general discussion, and that's really focusing on what happened previous event and previous year at that track. And so we sort of take those bits into consideration, but it's more on event where the driver feedback really comes into its own. We've got hundreds of sensors on the car that are telling us all sorts of information. Having the driver, who is the most sensitive sensor, be able to convey what they're feeling and allow you to correlate that to what you're seeing on the data, that is really key.
The big things that drive the setup of a car, really understanding the circuit, so the nature of the corners, how long the straights are, how fast you're going to be going. The weather also plays quite a large part in that. And then also even the tyres that Pirelli bring can change how we decide to set up a car for a Grand Prix race.
Simulations are very important. There are lots of experiments that we could do on track trying to find that local optimum for each particular part of the setup, but that would take us forever. It would take us a huge number of tyres and plenty of laps to make sure that we get every lap driven cleanly and the comparisons actually give you the answer that you're after. Whereas the computer simulations, it's doing the same lap over and over again, just driving to the optimum slip angles, and it allows us to look at everything in real detail and not have any of the noise that you have with the track data.
Going to a new circuit, it is more difficult because you haven't got that historical database of all the data off the car, but importantly, where you've done experiments on setup in the past, you know what works and what doesn't work. You've also got the reference of last year's setup that you can convert into settings for your current car, which often forms a fairly good starting point, or at least feeds into that. But when we go to a new circuit these days, a lot of the work is done in simulation. Some of that is just using our computer models, but a big part of it is letting the drivers drive our virtual car in the simulator, giving us their feedback on the balance and the handling, and just trying to evolve the setup that way. When you actually get to that track, the key thing is understanding whether the assumptions that you've made in simulation for how the circuit is, how the tarmac is, how the tyres are behaving, that those assumptions translate well into the reality of what you're seeing on the track itself, and the temperatures that everything's operating at, the balance that the drivers had. Now, if they are, you can normally just continue on that learning curve. If not though, it might be that you've got to make some adjustments to wing levels, to the mechanical balance, to the aero balance, to try and get it back in the right place. But the philosophy is always really try and do as much learning as you can before you get to the event, and then just continue on that curve when you arrive.
Perfect setup. I think that's a bit of a unicorn thing, to be honest. I don't think it's out there because there'll always be something that we could improve.
It's often talked about, but in reality, we might have 50 to 100 different things that we can change on the car. And given that you've only got a couple of hours of running on a Friday, an hour on Saturday to fine tune it, the chance that you've actually got absolutely everything correct is practically nil.
It may not be something that you can see from the outside, it may not be something that the driver can feel, but there's always a compromise when you're looking at every element of setup. You're having to to work out the best compromise of maybe ride versus aero load versus camber versus roll angle. It's everything has a knock-on effect.
When the drivers talk about the perfect setup, really they mean the balance was absolutely everything they needed for the lap, the tyres were holding on, they were all in the right window, and they had the confidence to push the car right to the limit. But from the engineer's point of view, do we ever get it absolutely perfectly right? I doubt it.